Welcome to another episode of Bright Headed Publishing Audiobook Book Club. I am your host, Kelly Morgan. Today we meet author Douglas Rappaport. Doug has written a wonderful coming-of-age novel titled Reckoner. We also learned that he is a trained screenwriter, and his book he is hoping to be turned into a pilot that will then be turned into a limited television series. I think it's exciting. He shared with us his process and how he became a writer. I truly enjoyed speaking with him. He is the newest member of our ever-growing book club. Let's welcome author Douglas Rappaport. Doug, thank you so much for being on the podcast and being the newest member to the book club. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
I am so excited that you are here. We're going to talk about your book, Reckoner, and we'll get into that. But I am always interested to find out how writers become writers. So, before Reckoner was a published book, did you always know that you wanted to be a writer?
Yeah, pretty much. I started writing as a little kid, writing like short stories and whatever. Wherever I was, if I was with my mother, and she was getting her hair done, I was writing about that. If I was at the dentist, I was writing about that. So it's just taking real life experiences and making short stories out of them. I'm originally a musician, a classically trained musician, and so I sort of left writing for a while and was a musician. And then after, in my early 20s, I guess, I came back to writing again in a serious way. And Reckoner is my third book.
Wow. What instrument did you play?
I was a classically trained violinist and composer.
Wow. Impressive. Yeah. But eventually you came back to writing.
I came back to writing. It's like, music was a way to express myself creatively, but I guess all along writing was really my number one output for creativity. So that's what I came back to.
So how do you go to publishing that first novel? What did that look like?
So my first novel, similar to this novel actually, was a coming of age. And it was about a kid who was a musician, so it was obviously pretty autobiographical. Well, not pretty autobiographical, the fact that he was a musician and some of the things he goes through, but it's fiction in the end. But that was a 4-year undertaking of that book, writing and editing that. It's called One Day the Weatherman, and that was a real great experience, and I thought I sort of had coming of age. I had done it. Got it out of my system. Second book was nonfiction, sort of memoir-ish, like essays about love and relationships and things like that. And then I came back to fiction again, and had another coming of age book in me after all. So that's what Reckoner is.
Did you self-publish your books?
I self-published the first two, and I published the third one with a publisher in Michigan called Mission Point Press, which is a really great independent publisher. I would highly recommend them. They're really great to deal with, which wasn't my experience with some of my past books. Yeah.
How was the experience different from the first two books? Did you self-publish?
So what happened was I self-published the first two books, and then third book, Reckoner, I actually had a traditional contract with a publisher in Europe. And without getting too into it, it was just a nightmare. Sort of losing the control that I had with self-publishing and having to go through a really tumultuous relationship with that publisher. So I published it under a pen name, a different title, which ended up being a good thing in the end, because after I got out of that contract, I was able to just sort of throw it aside and changed the title, which was really my original title, was Reckoner, excuse me, was Reckoner all along, and using my real name this time. I was able to just distance myself from that other experience. So
nice. So when you decided to publish any of the books, did you find an editor? Did you edit them yourself, or did you go out and find an editor?
So both. I'm one of those writers that edits while I write. I wish I could. I'm not able to just spit out the first draft like some people can, and then go back and go back and clean it up after that. I mean, I'm editing as I write, and then I get through the first draft, which has been edited to a degree, and then I edit it again and again and again and again. But I'm always editing, sort of. But I had a professional editor for all 3 books.
Yeah, I think having a professional editor, you can only edit so much.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially your own work before you just stop seeing stuff. I think, you're just so close to it that it's always great to have a second pair of eyes.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So now that you are published and you're working with a publisher, what advice would you give to somebody who is maybe going down this road? Maybe they have a manuscript, they're thinking self-publish, maybe I'll try to find a publisher. What advice would you give them?
Always I would proceed with caution. Obviously my first traditional experience was really bad. So I would definitely caution people to do their due diligence and their research of the publisher. If you're feeling weird about something, I belong to different writing groups on Facebook, and people are always posting stuff like, oh, someone contacted me, they want to publish my book, and they're doing this, and they're asking this, and they're saying this. What should I do? Is it real? And generally, I think people's gut instincts, you really have to trust that. And if you're talking to a publisher or an agent or whoever you're talking to, or someone you believe is a publisher or an agent, and you just have a gut feeling that there's something wrong about it, whether they're asking you for money for different things or just something weird about it, then I would definitely say, listen to your gut and your instinct, and know that, you might be dealing with, people that don't have your best interests at heart, and to, continue looking. There's other fish in the sea, and, someone will definitely find your work if you really stick to it.
Yeah, or if it sounds too good to be true.
Yeah, that's true too.
That's probably another telltale sign
that's definitely true.
Probably not talking to the right people.
Right, definitely.
Because they tend to go and get you with vanity, right? And tell you how great you are, especially if you're out there shopping your book and you've heard a bunch of no's.
Definitely.
Right, and then you hear
get that first
yes,
and then absolutely.
Yeah, and that first yes may not be a true yes.
Yeah.
And as far as what you're looking for, so you're right. Good advice. Proceed with caution. So I'm interested to hear about your book, The Reckoner.
Reckoner.
Oh, I'm sorry, Reckoner.
That's all right. Yeah.
How it came into being, and you said that I guess you had published it before under a different name. So is it the same book?
It's not really, because I had such a great editor for Reckoner that it really changed the entire manuscript, the design of it too, but not just the exterior of the book, but the interior, the way they designed it, was fantastic. So it's like the other book doesn't even exist. Like it's a different book. I think it's a different experience.
So tell us about it.
Sure. So Reckoner is about a young kid named Miles Rockefeller, and despite his last name, he's the furthest thing from rich or privileged. He's a foster kid, really, jumping around from one foster home to another, and a troubled, sort of lost kid. And when the book opens up, he's in rehab. Actually, he's got a drug addiction, a pretty bad drug addiction. And finally, his last foster home has sent him to rehab, and there he meets another teenager, a little older than him, named Sawyer, who's also lost and troubled. But this guy is a real where Miles is sort of isolated and not very outgoing. Sawyer is the exact opposite. He's a total charismatic, a con man, really, despite his age. And long story short is they end up becoming friends, and Sawyer convinces him to leave rehab with him, and they end up starting to commit small crimes until finally someone is shot and killed, and Miles has to reckon with that. And what happens after that. So it's just really about two kids, and one of them is, a bad guy, and he influences Miles, and they do bad things together.
So what was your process in writing the book? You said that you edit as you go. So are you somebody that you just sit down and you write, it comes to you, or did you plan it out, like with an outline and everything?
So I'm not an outliner. I'm a blank pager, but I say that with a stipulation, and that is I don't just hit the blank page with no idea what I'm going to do. Like if I don't have the beginning and the end in my head, I can't do it, more or less. I need to know where I'm starting and where I'm going to end up, and generally I can fill in the middle of the sandwich, myself. But if I don't know, like I said, where I'm starting and where I'm going to end up, then I'm going to be in trouble. So that's the kind of blank pager that I am.
So I would imagine that as a writer, you have several story ideas swarming in your head.
Yeah.
How do you decide which ideas actually make it to paper?
That's a great question. I like most writers, I keep a list of different ideas I have, and believe it or not, this book actually wasn't on that list, and that's generally the funny thing with life. It's the unexpected stuff that happens. And what happened was several years ago, I was in rehab myself. I was being detoxed from benzos, from tranquilizers, and what had happened was, from a very early age, from being in music, I had developed an anxiety disorder. I had massive stage fright, which derailed my career ultimately, but I had really bad anxiety. And so when I went to doctors, they kept prescribing me benzos. And nobody told me that you couldn't be on benzos for a long period of time. I just did what the doctor hands me a prescription. I'm like, okay, does it make me feel better, or, more relaxed? And I fill it. So, long story short was I was on a drug named Klonopin for probably the greater part of 20 years, which was I found out later, way too long to be on it. It's a short-term palliative drug. It's not supposed to be a long-term drug, but again, nobody mentioned this to me. So it ended up flipping my central nervous system upside down, and I had to go into rehab to be detoxed from the Klonopin. Which was brutal. I don't recommend it to my worst enemy. It was the worst thing, one of the worst things I think a person can go through, and physically, mentally, emotionally, it's just a horrible thing to go through. But when I was in rehab, I was obviously by myself a lot, and I was alone for my thoughts and reflections, and you're not really allowed to read in rehab other books, especially fiction, and so I started writing down ideas, and the idea of Reckoner came to me just from my experience in rehab and meeting the different people that I met. It was like Reckoner is sort of a mosaic of different characters and different points of view, and meeting these different people, it just screamed out to me that a story had to be told, and that I had to be the one to tell it. So I took some notes, and even though the Reckoner is based on a little bit on my experience in rehab, obviously Miles and Sawyer and anybody else that's in my book is fictitious. Excuse me, it's fictitious, but it was just that experience in rehab just brought my creativity to a really high level in terms of being inspired. And so I started writing down first draft in good old pen and paper, and got out of rehab, got my body back, ended up not using anything that I'd written down with pen and paper when I was in rehab, but I took that story, that idea, and turned it into a novel.
So you had mentioned that with this book you have a publisher, but I would imagine that you're still having to help with the marketing of the book.
Oh, yeah.
So what does that look like? Because marketing seems to be a big challenge for everybody that I speak with, those that self-publish and those that have publishers.
Yeah, no.
So what does that look like for you?
It's hard. I think I suck at marketing. I'm not even on Twitter. I'm on Facebook, and I just went on Instagram a few months ago. I was on Twitter years ago, but I don't have a current Twitter account, and so I'm sort of like an agent's worst nightmare. Platform doesn't really exist, but marketing is a whole other thing. Like it takes a lot to write a book, obviously, and it's a whole other thing to market yourself and market your book. And I found different ways to market my book, to go, obviously like this, to go on podcasts and talk to people like yourself, and I really enjoyed these podcasts and doing that. I've done some social marketing, but it's really tough whether you're traditionally published or self-published. It's something you have to do. So
yeah, some publishers now will even ask for what is your marketing plan as they're looking at taking you on, especially if it's a small publisher. You have to be prepared to figure out how you're going to market your book, and I think that's very, very challenging. And it's time consuming. It can be incredibly time consuming, and most people work a full-time job because writing doesn't pay the bills yet. The dream is one day that it will, but until then, you still have to do other things. So yeah, I get it. Have you thought about putting your books on, making them audiobooks?
My second book is actually an audiobook. The Victim of Circumstance is an audiobook. That's the nonfiction, memoir-ish essays that are an audiobook, and that turned out great. It's one of the best things I ever did, because I found a great voiceover actor who did a killer job, and so that audiobook is available. But I'm probably going to do an audiobook with Reckoner too, because I had such a great experience with Victim of Circumstance. And I'm also trying to turn Reckoner into a TV series. I've written a pilot. I have a background, and I used to live in LA. I have a background in screenwriting. And so I'm trying to do that as well.
So tell me about that. How does that work? How do you go from a book to a pilot? I mean, because I would imagine that there's so much that you would have to leave out, but you want to give enough information that there's interest.
Right. So you have to map it out. So like I mapped out that it would be around 8 to 10 episodes, a limited series. And so I mapped out from my book, where I saw episode 1 being, episode 2, 3, 4, all the way till, I can't remember, like I said, whether it was 8 or 10 episodes I had originally planned. And then, so the pilot is really what you start with, obviously. That's what you're submitting to production companies. But they also want to see, if it's a TV series, they want to see how you've mapped out the whole series. They want to see what happens in episode 2 through 8. How does it end? What happens in episode 4? What happens in episode 5? So you have to have it mapped out at least, and if you can, like a series Bible of like who the characters are and what the ultimate story is, and map it out like that. But my pilot is just sort of an introduction to the characters of Miles and Sawyer, with sort of a foreshadowing of what happens with the murder, and leaving that, and then ending on a sort of cliffhanger, the pilot, and then leaving the rest of the story to be told through the remaining episodes.
Did the pilot, or does the series differ much from the book?
So far, no. But that, that's obviously, malleable. It's probably going to change. But right now it's pretty close to the book.
I think that's cool. So as you work on getting it into a TV series, I think that would be very cool to see your characters come to life.
Yeah, absolutely.
On the screen. I think when you wrote them, you probably have an idea for what they look like and what they sound like in your head.
Yeah.
And then trying to translate that to film, I think is very cool.
Yeah. It's and when you're planning out a TV series, it's good to come up with a few actors who you think can play different characters, and that could go into your Bible, your series Bible, of like, what does Miles look like, and maybe this actor is what he looks like, to give the producers an idea of the type of actor and what your character is going to look like.
Right. Now, you had mentioned that, as a TV show, it'd be a limited series. Is Reckoner a standalone? Could it be a series?
I don't think so. I think it's a limited series. The story definitely ends. I'm working on a new book, which is actually going to be a series of books, that is. But Reckoner is really is one book. I don't plan any sequels or anything like that, so that's why I see it as a limited series. It has an arc and it ends, and so I couldn't see making it not limited.
Gotcha. So the books that you're working on now, the series, can you tell us anything about that?
Sure. It's quite a departure for me, actually. It's, believe it or not, I finally wrote a novel that's not coming of age. I guess 2 was the magic number. But it's speculative fiction, so it falls under science fiction, I guess. It's called Dead People. I'm finalizing that now. I am planning it to be a series. Looking for a publisher for that, and might go back to my publisher for Reckoner for that. I just haven't decided yet, and I'm really excited about it.
So the book is done. The manuscript is done.
It's close to being done. Yeah.
Now, are you going to send it off to have somebody edit it for you? Or are you going to...
Yeah, I'm planning to have an editor. I might use the same editor I had used before.
So when do you think the book would be, how long, I guess my question is, how long will you shop for an editor? Or do you have a timeline in your head that when you would like to see the book actually come out?
I'm looking to have it come out maybe later this year, at the end of the year, that is, like a Christmas type of situation. And one thing I can recommend to people who are looking for an editor, I had a great editor for Reckoner, but I was looking for an editor for this because it's different. It's speculative science fiction. And although I might use that same editor again because they did such a great job, I am open to looking at other editors that specialize in this type of story. And a great thing that I figured out, that I learned rather, which is when you're looking for an editor, there's lots of editors who will edit like 4 or 5 pages of your manuscript for free, just to give you a taste of the type of editing they do and how they would edit it. So I highly recommend doing that. 4 or 5, 6 pages, whatever the editor is willing to do for free, and getting that back, and then you can sample 2, 3, 4 different editors and see if any of them sort of feel right. And I did that recently with the prologue of my new book, and I found a really cool editor who I'm considering using it to edit the full book. But that's how I found him.
Yeah, you're right. A lot of editors will give sample edits. You can gather 3 or 4 or 5 sample edits, and then kind of determine what you like the best, because editing is really suggestions.
Yeah.
So you have to really, I think, have a certain rapport with the person that's editing your book.
Yeah.
And that they kind of understand the story and what you're trying to convey.
Yeah, and I would highly recommend that if you do get sample edits, that you don't just go with the person who had the least amount of comments. That would be the wrong way to go. Obviously, as a writer, you have to have tough skin, and the best editor for you might be the one who actually wrote the most suggestions. It just happens to be who you click with, who feels right.
Right.
These edits seem like good suggestions, and that align with your vision of your story.
Right.
But don't just go for this guy only had 2 comments, so I guess my book's perfect and I don't need to, get it edited too much. You can't do that.
Yeah, that's very true. It is a process. The whole book writing, getting it published, the whole editing, formatting, cover design, it's a process. Mm-hmm. And you should want to take your time and find the best possible editor for your book, because once, it's out there.
Yeah.
Right? It's out there.
Yeah,
and so,
out there, yeah.
You want it, you're going to, if you're going to get reviews on your book, you want to get reviews on the book as if somebody liked the story or not. Not that there were typos and editing errors.
Right. Exactly.
So you should definitely take your time and know that it's a process and look for the best editor that you can.
Absolutely.
And take your time in putting your book out there. I get that you can get anxious. I get it.
Yep.
But sometimes it's not, the quickest route is not necessarily the best route.
Yep.
Doug, do you have a website? If we're interested in the book, where would we look?
I don't have a website. That's something that's on my radar to do, hopefully very soon. But I did create a bit.ly link to the book on Amazon, so that's easy to find. Bit.ly is bit.ly/Reckoner book, and that'll take them right to the Amazon page for Reckoner.
And all the information will be in the podcast description. Doug, thank you so much for being on the podcast being a member of the book club. This means that you are now a member of the book club.
Great.
So when you get the series up and you decide, when that book comes out later, you are more than welcome to come back on the podcast and we can discuss that book as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Bright-Headed Publishing Audiobook Book Club. I have been your host, Kelly Morgan. Today we spoke with author Douglas Rappaport. He told us about his book, Reckoner, and the other things that he has coming out soon. The book is available on Amazon, and the link is in the podcast description. If you are an author or someone who supports authors, and you are interested in becoming a member of the book club, I would love to have you. All you have to do is email me at brightheadedpublishing@gmail.com. Again, that's brightheadedpublishing@gmail.com. Next week, another author, a new member to our ever-growing book club. I'm so glad that you decided to listen. I'm thankful that you're a member of the book club as well. Until next time, keep writing.